Thank you for coming today. I'm really excited about today's presentation. It's about my home country. So Kim Morse is a professor of history at Washburn University, and she's going to be talking about the politics, economics, and kind of what's going on in the country right now. So I hope you enjoy.
And I'm going to take it like this. Clearly me and podiums don't get along. Never have, never will. So I'm not even going to bother with it. And as I said, with the big caveat, I'm a historian, and I actually love playing with the late 18th century through the 19th century. So I'm much more comfortable with dead people than I am with living people. But so with that as a caveat, please forgive me for any errors that I make. A few years ago, Elizabeth Nichols and I, another KU grad, my BA is from KU years ago, and my PhD is from UT Austin. But Elizabeth and I wrote the only, as far as we know, textbook on Venezuela. And the economics chapter and the political science chapter were by far the hardest ones for us to write because it's outside of our scope. But so I have spent a lot of time thinking about all of this. I've been back and forth to Venezuela since 1992. The last time I was there was last summer, 2013. My husband is Venezuelan. My hometown is the same as, I call it my hometown too, is the same as ours, and I could probably find your house if you give me, I could get there. So it's my world too. But as I'm a historian, I want to start with kind of a commentary on history, as it were. A friend of mine who is a professor of history at La Universidad, one of the Catholic universities in the country, recently wrote an article about that there are two new Bolivar movies. Two. The first one, Bolívar, el hombre de las dificultades. Bolívar, el hombre de las dificultades. Bolívar, the man of difficulties, which is where I got that, was the first one to come out. La Meta was the director, and it was perceived from the very beginning as the Chavista film. Maduro, the current president, endorsed it and said everybody needs to go see it. And that was from the very beginning kind of a death blow, because half of the country or more, by definition, is going to hate it because Maduro said everybody has to go see it. So if you want to hit the first trailer there. And we've got the trailer for both of these movies. The first one is not subtitled, so it's just imagery. The second one is. There you go.
La corona decretó pena de muerte en mi contra. No puedo pisar ningún puerto español.
El Libertador mendigo.
Tenías que revolverlo todo con tu desgraciada revolución.
Estoy dispuesto a comenzar de nuevo. La libertad merece que uno empiece una y otra vez. Es mejor tratar de viajar a Inglaterra para tener
Recibas al legendario Bolívar.
For a whole
y
continent.
después los ingleses, a los americanos nos van a sojuzgar por 100 años más.
Mi enemigo es todo aquel que sostenga la esclavitud.
¿Quién compra tu honor?
Él habla en nombre del rey de España.
Bolívar pronto dejará de ser un problema.
El imperio español tiene todas las de ganar, pero rendirse no es la opción, presidente. Él te paga.
Vas a morir sin saberlo.
¿Tenés esposa?
Juré que nunca me volvería a casar.
Amiga.
No nos dejan gobernar con nuestras propias leyes, cultivar lo que queramos. Esta vez no nos vamos a dejar engañar.
Si no hay unión, no puedo darles nada.
¿A quién vas a poner a trabajar en el campo? ¡A nosotros! Sin ellos no hay revolución.
Cierren el bloqueo del puerto. Hay que impedir que se acerquen a Bolívar.
A ver cuál de tus remeras se sacrificó por ti como lo hice yo.
En cuanto partas, tu corazón empezará a latir por otra.
No es poco lo que queremos conquistar, no puede ser poco lo que dejemos. No es poco la libertad de todo un continente. ¡Viva la patria, carajo!
Treason, vengeance, jealousy, revolution. All right. And looks like certainly a film that would get an audience if it wasn't for its political baggage. Just to put that in a little bit of context, 81.6% of the population now says the situation in Venezuela is really bad, muy mal. 67.5% of the population says that the current President Maduro is doing a really bad job. And more than half of all Venezuelans say that they do not want Maduro to finish his current term. And to make matters worse, the Bolivar, the actor portraying Bolivar in that film, declared himself a Chavista right before the films opened. So no matter what, everybody was going to see this film as bad, no matter what it did or said historically or sentimentally in terms of film. The other film, Alvaro's Libertador, does not have the political baggage. Bigger production, European funding, even positive U.S. press. I wouldn't be, it might show up downtown at Liberty Hall at one point in time or the other. New York Times and NPR have all reviewed it in one way or the other. But what is interesting is that Alvaro, those are those stats, I'm sorry. Alvaro, the director of the film presumed to be less biased, plays with history no less or perhaps even more than the first one does. The Bolivar in this film is a superhero. Truly a mythological, all he's missing is a cape. Mythological superhero. He even has Bolivar dying in an assassination as opposed to a tuberculosis as he actually did. And Bolivar's nephew is actually part of the conspiracy that leads to the assassination, not at his bedside as history actually was. So this, for me, I haven't seen the film yet. It's not been widely released. But as I look at this trailer, I'm seeing Mel Gibson movies in Spanish, right? And we all know how good Mel Gibson movies are with history. But this is the one that in Venezuela, amongst more than half of the population, and internationally, is getting the acclaim. This one is subtitled.
El verdadero destino del hombre es la libertad. La voluntad de ser libre es un impulso innato. ¿Quién puede detener el viento? ¿Quién? Nadie.
Your vision of democracy is exactly what Washington and Jefferson promised.
Yes, it is. But it's not only for white men. It is for all men. Invasion. They massacred the first Americans and enslaved the continent for 300 years. Este continente está esperando por un diluvio. Un diluvio que finalmente lo inunde de libertad. Y ese diluvio comienza hoy. Ese diluvio comienza hoy. Hoy proclamamos la Gran República Americana de Colombia.
We do expect soldiers from all over the world to join us.
Did you ever consider turning back off this mountain?
No nos dejemos separar. Pero todos somos hijos de América. ¿Quién es usted?
Yo soy el pueblo. Long live el Libertador.
My dream of a single union continues. Not to conquer, to liberate.
Even the physical type is wrong. That guy is about a foot taller and at least 100 pounds bigger than Bolivar actually was. He was he was taller than I am, but not much. And he certainly didn't have heartthrob sort of looks like this guy does. And alluded to more in the first film, he was actually really quite conflicted about race. And you can kind of see it in the trailer where he comes to an understanding. is not there from the very beginning. The thing about Bolivar is he was a paradox wrapped in a conundrum and ambiguous the entire time. I often compare him to, historically, to actually Jefferson. Militarily, there are parallels to Washington, but intellectually, he can be all over the map, just as Jefferson was all over the map. But that's not the vision that's put there. So the question is, what does all of this have to do with Venezuela now? You want to hit the thing. I don't want to miss ice cream. All right. The first and the easiest message is that even history is not safe. Even history is not neutral. Actually, when we think about the mess that contemporary Venezuela is, and it is a mess, problems with education are at the heart of the mess. And that's K through 12 and at the university level. And this goes back starting into the Chavez period, and long before Chavez died. And by the way, we don't need to worry about the exact date because there was much controversy about when actually he died. Even if we could figure that out. There was and is significant concern about the politicization of education, especially K-12 education. Now, some of it is not all bad. One of the revisions in the national curriculum, and one thing to keep in mind is that Venezuela, like many countries, has a national curriculum designed at the national level, unlike the United States, where states and local school districts have quite a bit of say. That's not the way education works in Venezuela. The state establishes the curriculum. And some of the changes were actually kind of positive in that the new national curriculum does introduce Afro-Venezuelans and indigenous Venezuelans in a positive light. Really, and for the first time, frankly, in the history of the national curriculum. This is good. The problems are with the degree to which that curriculum may be perceived as politicized, as so endorsing one side of a political spectrum that any objectivity has been lost. The other problem that especially teachers saw was that the new reforms allowed local political committees, or committees tied with politics, oversight with what happened in classrooms. So people that weren't informed with curriculum and pedagogy and what good teaching is were making decisions, or in theory could make decisions about the outcomes in classrooms. And that was problematic. And honestly, too, even people who are Chavistas, oftentimes, including my own in-laws, would take their kids out of the public schools and put them into private schools because they were worried about long-term the quality of the education itself at the K-12 level. There are also pretty significant problems with higher education. Really significant problems with higher education. You want to hit the next slide? Sweet. Oh, well, before that, briefly though, officially the dropout rate K-12 has gone down to 7.7, and about, well, there's 6 million of the almost 8 million are in public schools. Those numbers have fallen from 15% in the late 1990s, those dropout rates, which are significant. But still, the concerns about quality persist and are quite real. One more. Okay, higher education. And there's two ways to think about this. One of the things that Chavez argued was that more people needed access to higher education. And I think that was one of those ideas that universally most anybody anywhere would not see as problematic, right? And the reality too was that for many average Venezuelans, access, not so much in terms of funding, because public higher education was awfully close to free. Awfully close to free. Not completely, but awfully close to free. So it wasn't so much an issue of being able to pay for it. It was more an issue of access in terms of location. Not all universities throughout the country offered the same curriculum. So say, for example, you lived in Puerto La Cruz and you wanted to be a doctor, you couldn't, there was no university, there's no university in the general vicinity that had a medical school. You had to go to Caracas, for example, to pursue a degree in medicine. And that, for the average person, was not exactly that was not possible, right? So there always have been problems with access like that, and the most important are the best universities, and the best universities in Venezuela were and are on par with any best university anywhere else. The entrance exams would keep many people out, which is normal in many contexts, right? So access was perceived as a problem. So Chavez's solution to this was to open these Bolivarian universities all over the country. All over the country. There are somewhere, well, how many? 1,300 now, 1,300 Bolivarian campuses across the country. So, exactly, good grief. Now, okay, here we are in a university context. 1,300 universities open in the last 14 years. So you know your mind, like, how do you find faculty, right? How do you find trained faculty with all the appropriate degrees and the qualifications to staff all of these 1,300 new universities? And the reality is, you can finish the sentence that even from the perspective of the quality of the teaching and the people that you can put in the classroom, it's not the same. Not by a long shot. Not the same as what you had in any of the traditional universities. So that's problematic. It's also a curriculum that was at like the K-12 level highly politicized. And that's a problem too when you think about that going forward, especially when you think about them becoming teachers. So the concerns about the word brainwashing was thrown around a lot. And it's kind of an extreme word, but there wasn't necessarily an encouragement of freedom of thought and critical thought, the way we think that a university should endorse. Any good university should endorse. The other part of the problem is that, again, in order to address this problem of accessibility, the argument was that it should take less time to finish a university education, so you could move people through more quickly, get them out into the job force, so that they could become more productive citizens. So, law, as an example. In Venezuela, traditionally, law is not a graduate degree. You know, here you get the undergraduate degree and then the additional law school. The traditional law degree in Venezuela was 5 years start to finish. So it's kind of combines the BA and the JD at the same time in 5 years, the traditional version. The Bolivarian version condenses it to 4. So, again, not only do you have concerns about the quality of faculty from our perspective, right? But you also, and frankly from the traditional university's perspective. So with the beginning of this movement toward Bolivarians, all of the traditional universities in Caracas and throughout the country had were quite noisy in their opposition to this. Not so much in challenging their student populations, they weren't worried about that. They were thinking it more along the lines of what a university education is supposed to be and what the consequences are long-term from this, right? And then getting the law degree as an example in 4 years, you just can't get everything you need in a short amount of time. We all know that. So the question about education is pretty significant. And then added to that, since 2006, funding for the traditional universities has been flat. So no increased funding for the traditional universities. All the funding has gone into, or the increases have gone into the Bolivarians. And that's, okay, so that's a Bolivarian, or one of them in Caracas. That's the la UCB, the Universidad Central de Venezuela. La UCB, was in its moment one of the known globally for modernist architecture. Mid-century modern, parts of it were really, and still kind of are in their ragged edges, quite spectacular. But it's ragged. And you can tell, it's ragged. And it, in a way, is symbolic of what's happened to traditional higher education across the country with everything flat since 2006. So we know what that means in terms of infrastructure, we know what that means in terms of research, we know what that means in terms of technology, and we also know what that means in terms of faculty pay. In 2013, faculty in at least the Caracas institutions, and there are many of them, together with students, went on a long-term, and university students, went on a long-term strike and said, we're not going back to school. We're not opening these campuses again until this funding problem is addressed. Confronting Maduro at that point in time rather directly. By summer of 2013, Maduro was saying, well, we will give faculty raises. And by the way, faculty were earning the rough equivalent of about $300 a month. Yeah, and you know, those of us that are in the humanities and social science know where we fit on the pay scale of being compared to the sciences and business. $300 a month even makes humanities look really good in comparison, right? We'll give you a raise, but you have to cede basically your speech rights. You have to kind of a no complaint contract, a no criticism sort of contract. Yeah, and that's only slightly problematic. And so you put your intellectual population in this terrible bind. Do you want a living wage or do you want freedom of speech? Which is a terrible position to put people in, right? So education in part is symbolic of multiple layers of problems. Economically, one more. The situation is disastrous. And this is where I am not an economist. I don't understand monetary policy. I don't get it. It's just too big for my little historian brain to get my head around. What I can say is this: it's gone from bad to worse. It's gone from bad to worse. And you don't need to read the specifics. Don't make any difference, really. It's just that's inflation, and it's one of the highest. It's the highest in Latin America, and it's one of the highest globally right now. And the worst of it, frankly, has been since March 13.
That's where Chavez dies, and then it spikes from there. So it's not been good, but it's gotten worse, right?
What's the number at the top level?
Well, that is about 325%.
Inflation is 325%?
Yep.
Whoa.
Annual.
Whoa. Oh.
And university funding is constant.
Yes.
Yes. Not only university funding is constant, but there's many other fixed things that are constant. So you've got how do people make ends meet, right? So you've got that significant problem. Now you want to get one more screen? I'm doing ice cream. I don't want to mess the ice cream. At the same time, inflation is going through the